I think it's been told in public, and it'll be told here, where Family Guy had taken a crack at William Shatner.
Oh.
Who, there had been this joke, and the next thing, this story, as I've heard.
Do you remember what the joke was?
I'm not going to repeat it, but I do.
Okay, you'll tell me later.
Yes. But the word came to the room that William Shatner was on the phone, and he was not happy. This is after the Sunday had aired. And Seth asked one of the sweetest writers on staff, salt of the earth guy, Danny Smith, I hope he's told this story, to take the call. And Danny is just a lovely guy, hilarious guy. And he gets on the phone, and as he then reports it, when William Shatner was complaining about it, Danny's response was, I know, I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. And I'm going to tell you something. When I saw this, I was shocked. You know, some of the younger writers on the staff think it's kind of cute to slip something in. And
Danny's his name?
Yeah.
I want to hang out with Danny.
He's spectacular. Look, I hope he's told the story. But, I mean, let's ignore the fact that it takes a year to produce these shows, and every line has to be written and recorded and drawn and then colored and then spotted with music and then sound. I mean, it was just like, but whatever it was, Danny, because he's such an authentic fellow, he and Shatner bonded.
Hey, everybody. Greetings on this kind of funky day here in Los Angeles. Funkier than usual, funky in a different way, funky weather-wise. I find that when it's rainy and gray in LA, which is pretty rare, it delivers an opportunity to really sort of take it in as a whole in a way that you don't know. Because we just get so taken by the sunshine. We get so spoiled by the great weather here. And today's just kind of funky. I do love LA, I really do. I mean, every city and every town and every country has its stuff. And California certainly has its share of problems, but I love the state of California, and I really love Los Angeles, and I love living here. I feel really at home here. This is where I feel the most at home. But it's weird sometimes. I'm very excited about today's episode of Stories to Tell. My guest today is Rich Appel, who is the showrunner for the show Family Guy, head writer. He's had such an incredible career, and I've known Rich since 5th grade. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we met in 5th grade. We went all through high school together. I wouldn't say we were tight. We weren't really friends in school. We were friendly. And then we lost touch with each other until about 10 years ago when I moved back to LA. And his life and career they've had so many twists and turns. Really fascinating journey. And very bright, very funny. He is such a wise ass. That's the reason that we're really friends now. We give each other a lot of shit, but I have so much respect for his soulfulness and his humanity and his humor. And we had a great chat here at my house. I think this was the first episode we filmed here in my bar room. This is when we started to go, this is the spot for this show, we think. So I hope you enjoy it. My guest is Rich Appel on today's Stories to Tell. Download it, save it, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give us some love. We're a fledgling new show. We need your help. We need your support. Tell your friends and tell them to tell 10 friends. Enjoy the episode. Rich Appel on Stories to Tell.
God, I'd love to have a drink with Barry Manilow. Oh, it's Richard Marx. Next best thing. Thank you. How are you?
What a dick. Oh, a dick.
Well, two can play that game.
All right, cheers.
Good to see you.
You too. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I last saw him when we were in 5th grade.
We started in 5th grade. That's where we go back.
10 years old.
By the way, you asked for a Paloma. How is it?
It's delicious. Thank you.
Good, right?
I don't usually drink this early in the day, but when in your home, I will start drinking early.
I wake up hammered. 5th grade.
Yep.
It's like, it sounds like a story that we made up.
We actually met when I was in 4th grade because I came for a tour of the school, and randomly, Richard was assigned.
So I hosted you, and then we were classmates from 5th grade through high school.
Yep.
Then we lost touch for a long time. Before I get into what happened to you, and because I think it's just one of the most interesting, fascinating stories.
I got a facelift.
I have one first question. How much joy do you take in knowing that the two of us look better than everybody else that we went to school with?
Well, that's for you to say. You've certainly aged very well.
Oh, okay. Let me look at you.
Well, people might wonder why my hair is this color, but that's, look, those are for
It's weird how my
other
hair
days.
just sort of stayed.
It's just, I know.
Stayed the same as high school.
It's just I guess you've been in California. Well, I'm not even sure longer than I have now. I might have been here longer.
Yeah. Well, you were born in New York City.
I was born in New York City, then lived in Palo Alto for years.
I didn't know until I did a little research on you that you lived in California before you moved to Chicago.
Before I moved to Chicago. Yeah, both my parents, as you know, were academics, and they taught at Stanford, and then they came to Northwestern and Loyola, and I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I always tell people where we grew up, it's both risky business, which is kind of happy fun, and ordinary people, which is
depressing.
Yeah,
it's really true.
And unemotional people and a lot of repression.
Yeah, it's true.
It's both.
I would say that we were friendly, not like best friends in school.
I would say we were friends.
We were
certainly,
friends.
Yeah. You very much had, and I always liked you and respected you. You had a very solid posse.
Yeah.
And they spanned a couple of different classes.
Yes.
And some of them were more Highland Park. I mean, you seem to, like the people, I forget exactly all.
Highland Park is a suburb where I lived.
Yeah, and I
lived in Wilmette.
Wilmette, a little further away. I mean, the other direction from the school. But yeah, I just vivid memories from 5th grade on.
Yeah. So we went to a private school. I don't think I've ever asked you. Like my parents, my father had a really successful jingle business, but they weren't like loaded. It wasn't like they were multimillionaires or anything like that. But they decided, I went to public school in kindergarten, I guess, in Highland Park. And then they heard about this private school where I could take the bus, and they heard it was a great school. And that my father said, look, that's what I want to spend our money on. I want to send our kid to a private school.
That and Lincoln Continental is the size of a city block.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Both his parents drove these very
that's true.
snappy
These big boats.
Lincoln Continentals.
But most of the kids, I think, that we went to school with, their parents were very wealthy.
Yes, and like I said, mine were both professors, and they too thought, it's worth spending the money to send him to the school. Also, the public school where I had been decided to collapse 4th and 5th grade into an open classroom where it was experimental learning. And my 4th grade, I'm not joking, we could make our own schedules, and I would put in 8:15 to 8:30 math, 8:30 to 8:45 reading, 8:45 to 3 fort building. I'm not kidding. And until the fire marshal, we had boxes. I still remember the joy of 4th grade. And then I went to camp, sleepaway camp for the first time. And as my parents have told
Wisconsin?
me, in Michigan. And I sent cards home that were illiterate. Like they could not understand what I was saying.
Because you were too busy building fucking forts.
Well, I just didn't know how to do anything. Right. And so they thought, and they couldn't get me out of that program for the 5th grade. Once you went in for the 4th grade, that was your 5th grade. So they started to look around and found. But I do remember, I mean, maybe I won't use last names, but I remember in 5th, 6th, 7th, going to a party at Joanne's house. And I just remembered, I'd never been in a house like that. Now, her parents were never home, it seemed. And she had older brothers and one younger brother. But it was just like, that house in Gone with the Wind. It's somewhere in the middle of Winnetka.
At the end of the...
Yes, and I just was like, who lives here?
Indoor pool?
Yes, it was just, that was like one of my first exposures to that, because I came to the school with no idea that it catered to a pretty affluent
Now,
crowd.
I have not thought about that since, but I remember I was probably the same party that we both went to. It was a birthday party, and it was a pool party. And as I remember, first of all, the fact that it was an indoor pool was kind of mind-blowing. But it wasn't just an indoor pool. It was Versailles.
No, it was massive with tiles.
Yes.
It was pretty amazing. And
It looked like a giant Turkish bath.
and one of my favorite stories, I mean, least favorite stories, because it was just tragic. When we were in, you know it well, 7th grade, Richard, was it 7th or 6th when you called me and said, what are you doing? And he called me to say, what are you doing after school on Thursday? And Mom, what am I doing? You have a dentist appointment. I've got a dentist appointment. Oh, you sure you can't come down to my dad's? Yes. Richard, I got a dentist appointment.
Yeah.
So he then called our friend Jeff, another one of these people from a rather well-to-do, and went down to your dad's studio where you recorded the Skippy commercial.
Peanut
If
butter.
you
Peter
believe
Pan
in peanut butter,
Peter
clap
Pan.
your hands.
Yes.
So Jeff,
That's why you couldn't have gotten hired, by the
because
way.
I
isn't it?
clapped off. So I said no. And this is 1974 or $5. I remember Jeff, our friend whose family owned half of Chicago, gleefully exclaiming that he'd made $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 from this. And this was a boy who was one of my best friends, and I'm still friends with him to this day. But he was a kid who had when we traveled, I remember we traveled once, and he bought like a little leather box. And I thought, well, that's really nice, but we're going to use it for. And he said, I'll put all my extra cufflinks and studs in there. We were like 15. I was like, first of all,
Extra?
who has cufflinks
he
and
has
studs?
extra.
And a tuxedo. You have extra?
He needs an extra. He needs space.
But thanks to you and your dad, he made an extra $7,000-8,000 while I was getting a cavity filled.
I paid for some of those extra studs.
Yeah, it was that was a painful realization.
I then lost track of you. Well, here's the thing. It was not surprising to me that you were accepted to Harvard. I've never asked you this. Did you go on a scholarship, on an academic scholarship? Okay. So Rich goes off to Harvard, and it makes total sense because from the time you arrived in 5th grade, you were the smartest kid in the class. Maybe with the exception of George Dresser Smith III, who was also
the
very
class
smart.
had 45 people.
Yeah, a very small school.
Richard clocked in at, I think, 38th. One year you were 37th. That was great.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, I think you're being generous, actually. And so I knew that you were going to Harvard. And then I was, I think, the only kid in our class who didn't go to college. Because I had to make the choice between going somewhere to go to college. And in the end of my junior year is when I got this freak phone call from Lionel Richie. I'd been writing some songs, and he heard my demo and was like starting to say, look, you should move to LA. So then I had that year where I was like, I don't want to go to college. I want to go to LA and see if, I would have quit my senior year if I could. My parents were like, look, you don't have to go to college. You can go try it out there, but you're going to finish high school.
Well, I'll tell you, and I know, I'm sure we'll talk about my own career trajectory. But
no, I don't really have much interest in that.
Okay, but I was going to say, that's a difference, and it's something that is admirable about you. And my dad, who always liked you a lot, and you'd think as a professor of English, and I remember him saying to me, the smartest move Richard could make, because he knows what he wants to do, he's talented.
And he's dumb as fuck.
And he would never say that. He would think it, but he would never say it. And I knew in a less clear way, but in my gut, that comedy and comedy writing was something I really was drawn to. Probably you were no doubt helped by the fact that, and your mother was a great singer, your father was a great jazz musician. So you grew up seeing those things as possible careers. In Wilmette, the North Shore of Chicago, being a comedy writer, it just felt like you might as well be an astronaut. I had no idea how to pursue it. And so I went to college, wrote for the Humor magazine, then unfortunately got into law school and felt like I should do that too. And then became a prosecutor until I was 30, when I finally was going to explode if I didn't try to be a comedy writer. But had I And people sometimes say, why do you think it took you so long? And it's a lack of confidence. I think until you feel like I can do this, and yes, I did at 30 feel that, but you felt it at 17, at 18, with no guarantee. It's not like you stayed in Chicago and decided, I'm going to be the best commercial jingle singer. No, you went out to a whole new world. So I always respected that a ton. And I think at 30 finally did what you had done.
But you're glossing over, which we're going to get into the nitty gritty of your law career. But
the streets of New York were no safer with me as a prosecutor.
That's bullshit. I would say, though, to put a button on that point you were just making, which I appreciate, is that the difference also was, yes, when I was 17, 18, and I was graduating from high school and moving to LA, I was like, I want to go be a rock star. I want to be a famous singer. But there was also a very real sort of, when I say backup plan, it wasn't like a backup plan like, oh, I'll go be a plumber. You know?
What was your backup plan?
The backup plan was I knew that I could make a living in the music business.
Right.
Even if I didn't become a star or have hits.
As a background singer or doing
I could
jingles?
work as a background singer. I could play keyboards on people's records. I play guitar. I could arrange. I could do song.
Right.
There were so many jobs available in the music business at that time that was like not a problem for me to have that in the back of my mind. Like, if this doesn't work out, I'm good. You didn't have that really.
That's true.
You didn't have that option.
That's true. But it happened so quickly for you, as I'm sure your fans know. And I remember I was in law school when I went to see you at the Bottom Line in New York.
That's right.
And your first record had come out with and it was one of those things where pre-internet, you didn't get hit, and pre-social media, you didn't get hit with all sorts of reminders or notices that someone you know. So it would be just this occasional thing. I'd pick up a magazine or something, and there would be Richard with, oh, how's that? And there was no place I would look to see how's the record doing on Billboard.
Right.
But so I went to the Bottom Line not really understanding, and you came out and you sang all those songs that had taken off. The crowd was going crazy, and I was just like, what is happening? And we went backstage, and you were still your same self, but there was a different aura about you, you know? And I was like, oh my God, I'm friends with a rock star. When did, like, that happened between civil procedure and evidence on Tuesday. That's what I did this week. And Richard released, 3 top 10 songs or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So.
But, okay, so when you're at Harvard, what are you majoring in? What are you studying at Harvard?
First year, everyone takes the same things, and then eventually there's some, but there's not that much choice. But I took a number of classes about criminal procedure and stuff, because I was thinking if I stayed in the law, I would do what I then did, which was I was a law clerk and then applied to the office that Rudy Giuliani used to run, the U.S. Attorney's Office, before he'd gone off the deep end. Back in the day, and I joined just after he left the office, but he'd made that office just kind of and it is the oldest prosecutor's office in the country. And because the jurisdiction is New York City and its borough, all Wall Street crime, mobster, media stuff. First,
you were involved in the Michael Milken trial, right?
No, a friend of mine was. I had I observed the Leona Helmsley trial. But I did, like my first case was a small part of the Russian mob to get these guys to flip on my mentor's bigger case. And at that point, it was a segment of the Russian mob that was all Jewish. And they're all Jewish immigrants who would come to New York. And my grandfather himself, a Holocaust survivor who had left Prague in 1940, came to trial, and the courtroom was just packed with the defendants' families. And he said at the break, he says, tell me, in all of New York, there's not one non-Jewish criminal defendant you could prosecute. And I was like, Grandpa, these guys are not good people. So, yeah.
But so when you, because I feel like what you've alluded to is a lack of passion that you're sort of relating to me. So between graduating from Harvard and then going to Harvard Law School, at none of that time are you like fired, like I'm going to become a rock star in the DA's office, I'm going to do this, I'm going to become... That wasn't an intoxicating idea?
Think, yes, and there was something about it that certainly appealed to me, and I knew when you're in law school, they spoon feed you certain kind of jobs that pay a lot that you don't particularly want at law firms. And so they were going to do that. And I had come close to thinking, well, that's what I'll do, until I was clerking and I got to know a mentor of mine who happened to be Jim Comey, who would go on to be the director of the FBI. And he had clerked for the same judge I did, so he'd always come around just to schmooze with the judge and the new clerks, and we became good friends. And he was in the U.S. Attorney's office, and I started to understand what they did, and that just seemed, it's an amazing world down there in Foley Square. Yeah. It's like, you work with the FBI, the DEA, the Secret Service. It's the best defense lawyers in the city, the sleaziest defense lawyer, agents who are really interesting and some who you want to keep an eye on, and the judges all had, so it's no secret that a lot of shows are set in courtrooms and because everyone goes through them. You can, every kind of character, rich, poor, sleazy, honorable, whatever it is, they all sometimes end up in a courthouse. So I was interested there, but honestly, as much for like the stories that I was seeing. Yeah. And so I had an interest and kind of always
Was it a lucrative job?
No, working for the government, pays you little. I made more working for law firms in the summer when I was in law school than I probably did a whole year working for the government. And the idea is you get trial experience and it's fun and interesting, and then law firms want to hire you because you've had all this experience.
And was that where you thought maybe you were heading?
Well, you sign up for 3 years, and it was coming up to the end of my third year, and my wife at the time, who's still a beloved friend, we went out to lunch with...
And you had 2 kids at this point, right?
Just one.
Okay.
At this point, she wasn't even pregnant. We were just about to start thinking about a family, and we went out one day to breakfast with a really good friend of mine and his wife, who I was friends with too, who were in LA in the business. And she said, when do you think it's too late for Rich? Because he's always, and my friend's wife, she said 30. And I was 29. And I took it to heart. And so I started to wake up early and write late nights. And Mona, my wife and friend, she kept noting, like, on weekends, you're getting up early to work now. When before, if you had to go to the courthouse to work on something on a weekend, sometimes you'd walk. Now, to make that obvious, we lived on 110th Street. Going down to Foley Square was a long, but I was in no rush to sit down. Yeah. And in the time I was writing scripts, then I sent them, it all happened rather quickly. I had a friend who gave them to his agent. The agent had hated them. It would have been the end of it. And it was Ari Emanuel, who was then not the Ari he is today. Right. He was a young agent himself. And he did like them. And I remember the day coming home. It was Mona's birthday on June 14th. I had taken her to see Ella Fitzgerald at Radio City. I said, you've got to see Ella Fitzgerald at least once. And we had a message on the voice machine, the little recorder machine.
I remember those.
Track to track.
Yeah.
From Ari saying, I've read your scripts, I'd like to represent you.
And you had written these scripts by yourself or collaborated?
No, written these scripts. Mm-hmm. I'd written episodes of Larry Sanders. I'd written sketches for Saturday Night Live. I'd written material for Letterman just to cover all the bases so they'd have a sampling. And by this point, we were expecting a child. And when I got the job at The Simpsons, I said, well, my wife's about to give birth. And he said, well, when do I start? He said, well, when can you fly? I said, well, let me call the OBGYN. She said, it's 6 weeks. I said, apparently he can fly at 6 weeks. Add 6 weeks to the birth date. That's your start date. And we came out, I had a 10-week contract, no health insurance, no guarantees, a 6-week-old baby, a new city. Looking back on it.
But it was so exciting.
It was exciting. And that
scary,
passion you're
sure,
talking about was the driver. And I felt like, what you were saying, every job has ups and downs. Every job has bad days and good days. And a friend of mine gave me great advice. He said, because he'd gone to law school, then he became a journalist. And he said, after a crappy day, I go to bed, but I think, no, what I do matters and it's something I want to do. And I knew from the moment I was out here 30 years ago that telling myself I'm a comedy writer, telling myself that this is my world and these are my colleagues and my friends, that feels right. And it makes me feel good, even if I have a show canceled.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've had 2 or 3 canceled. It's okay. It's all in a world that I not only want to be in, but had looked out from the outside in, thinking, how do I get into
the doing?
that?
It's when the doing is what brings you joy.
Yeah.
I mean, the accoutrement, the money and the trinkets and all that is great when you have success, when you have accolades.
And this man knows about money and trinkets.
I know a little bit about that.
Yeah.
We'll do a cutaway to my bathroom later. No, it's the doing.
The only thing not in there is a toilet, but I mean, it's got every gold record you could want.
But your description of not feeling any of that in your life before in New York, that it was a job, that it was like it was not the doing. I mean, I'm sure that there were some exciting days.
Yeah, trials were always funny and fun. I mean, look at me. It's like they weren't always funny. They were about crimes. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
But the things that I enjoyed were the human interactions and the personality quirks of the judge and the defense lawyers and working with the juries. That was all fascinating because it's theater.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, of course.
And the jury's your audience. And you knew humor works in court. You just have to, it's just in a small amount. You can't seem like you're, but yes, I didn't have that same fear of failure. I'm not embarrassed to say, I didn't lose a trial. I was very confident, partly because
whatever.
Worst thing happens, they fire me.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
And then I started at The Simpsons. That was my first job, 10 weeks in. And I was surrounded by names because it was only like the 4th season of the show, but I knew the names from the credits. And I didn't say anything. And I had a 10-week contract. And after like 4 weeks, I went up to a friend of mine who I'd made in the room. And I said, I feel like I should just resign. He said, no, you're doing it the right way.
Yeah.
You come in, you absorb, you don't have all the answers. That's what you should do. 4 weeks later, he came up to me and said, you better start talking. He said, you're 10 weeks? I said, yeah. He said, start talking.
Yeah, you better start talking.
And I did. And then I was like, okay, I think I've gotten the, but my son didn't sleep through the night till he was 2. So I'd be coming in some days just like.
So tell me about Mona during that period, because that was a pretty amazing leap of faith that she took in you.
Huge leap. My former wife is a brilliant novelist, so a real writer, and I don't say that lightly. And without her faith in me, I never would have done it.
Wow.
Because she was she didn't want to move to LA. She had grown up partly in LA and didn't like it.
Yeah.
But she was the engine in getting me to think it through seriously and say, if you don't do it, well then come to that decision that you don't want to do it. But she said, don't wake up at 40 thinking I've wasted the previous 10 years. And then, financially, because she was successful and I was working for the government, because we kept our place in New York and got a place in Santa Monica. And then she and our baby and nanny would be in New York from Labor Day to Christmas, and I would commute, which wasn't that hard before you're 109.
This is Grace.
This was Gabe, who was the older. And
Gabe's
then,
older than... Oh.
Yeah. And then, when he was 5, starting kindergarten, we were just in one place and then had a second child because we were in the same city.
Right.
Things like, I don't know how much you know about biology, but it helped.
I've heard it's a thing.
And, but yes, it was, and also getting to know her and other writers. And I had put it on such a pedestal kind of in my head that what they do, I don't even understand how it happens. And then I got to know her and some of her writer friends. And I was like, oh, when you are working and typing and writing, it doesn't look all justified like in a book that's bound either, does it? It looks just...
It's messy.
And then she said to me once, and it was a very generous thing. She said, writing is storytelling. And Rich, when we're out with friends, I'm more interested in a lot of the stories you're telling. And you have a innate understanding of how to shape a story. Things like that.
Yeah.
It came from someone I respected. Like I had plenty of friends in college and law school saying, you should write comedy.
Right.
I'm like, what the fuck do you know?
Right.
But she knew stuff. And I was like, all right, if she believes in me.
So from arriving in LA...
And then after we divorced, I gave everything back.
Yeah. Of course. arriving in LA, Ari Emanuel's representing you.
Uh-huh.
How long between landing in LA and just kind of setting up shop with
Yep.
with your new family to getting the gig on The Simpsons?
No, I came out with the
To
gig
do
on
that.
The Simpsons.
So you got the
I
gig.
had-
That was your impetus to
to
out.
move. Because if I had been
Let's just fucking. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. That was, if I had been a single guy with no kid coming, I would have either just moved out to LA, gotten any job, and taken any job in comedy. But because we just got in a place in New York, my wife had a career in New York, we were having a child. I had said to Ari, look, there's The Simpsons, Seinfeld, and Larry Sanders. Those, to me, are the three best shows. If there's any chance there, I could then see using that to justify this gargantuan uprooting of our life. And Ari was persistent as hell. And I know from people there that he just was relentless to get the guy who was running the show, David Merkin, who I owe my career to, who read me, then flew me out for an interview and hired me. And it was 2 10-week contracts. That was the, not even guaranteed to get to the second 10 week.
Right.
And I would say for those first 20 weeks, I was like,
Sure.
And
Because you had made a massive
move.
Was
And
there
also,
a possibility, if it had all gone to shit, that you could go back and get a job
Can I?
in the
Yes.
DA's office
And
again?
the single most generous thing anyone has ever said to me was Mona, who, remember, didn't want to come to LA. We had just bought an apartment in New York. Her friends were there, her work. And she said, I will do this for you on one condition, that if you're fired after 10 weeks, you give it at least a year. And most people, I think, would have said, if you're fired, back we go.
Right.
And her point was, I need to know that this means enough to you,
Yeah.
that you'll go through unemployment, that you'll figure out how to make money some other
Wow.
way. That's how to determine. If this just seems a lark because The Simpsons is The
Right.
Simpsons, then what are we doing?
Right.
And I took it to heart and I was like, yeah, this means a lot. And
How long from the time you come out, you take the gig, to you're the head writer at The Simpsons?
well, I would say after the first, when I got towards the end of the first season, I felt like, all right, I am understanding what I am doing. And I never was the head writer at The Simpsons. I became the co-executive producer. And then after 4 years, went over to run King of the Hill.
Right, okay.
And that was, I don't mean, but it's funny. Ari said to me when I got the job to go run King of the Hill after 4 years, and he said, this, it's so fast. You have had just a mediocre career. And I just laughed, and he said, why are you laughing? I said, I don't think that's what you meant. He said, wait, what did, I said, maybe you meant meteoric. And he said, what did I say? I said, mediocre. I didn't say that. I said, yeah, you said it. And it's true too. I said, we're talking about popular entertainment. It's okay.
The speed of your trajectory was pretty uncommon for this town.
And I think what also helps is that I do think it helped that I had a different, not that I particularly think it was so helpful to go to law school, but I think it gave me a little more sense of being grounded. I had a child. I wasn't as young as my years were, and you ask about, if I could have gone back then. While I was running King of the Hill, my mother, who became one of the first women deans of a law school in America, went to law school in the 50s, a pioneer, and she was in the ABA, the big National Bar Association. She went to some conference. Now, mind you, I'm running a TV show, and she tells me, she says, I bumped into Marty, who had been one of the partners of the law firm I'd worked at one of those summers. And he said they would take you back tomorrow. I was like, Mom, I'm not going back to being a lawyer. No, I'm not. But if anything were to happen, I was like, I could get fired from 6 jobs. I'm not going back to that.
That's hilarious. But it's such a mom thing.
It's such a mom thing.
Yeah. Okay, so then you're the head writer of King of the Hill and the executive producer.
Correct.
And you're there for how long?
3 years. And then I did a series based on the U.S. Attorney's Office, which only lasted for 1 season. It premiered opposite the first season of American Idol. And just to give you an idea, I recorded American Idol as well, then not my own show. Oh. So it got clobbered. And then went on to the Bernie Mac show and a couple of, and then
you got snatched up.
I got snatched up by Seth MacFarlane into his world, which has just been a great world. And
Did you go to Family Guy as head writer?
Nope.
Or?
I went to Family Guy because I was working a couple of pilots at the same time, and Seth knew I was sort of available to be assigned to a show.
Were you a fan of Family Guy?
Here's the yes, but I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it every week.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't watch The Simpsons every week after I left. When I'm writing, this is just, and I've heard this from other writers too, I watch less half-hour comedy than I think a lot of people who like it as much as I do, because I don't, like I will sample a show to get a feel for it, but I don't want it to inhibit me, because so often in a writer's room, someone will have an idea that's interesting, it's gaining traction, and someone, oh, they did that on Seinfeld. And I'm thinking, well, unless it's literally the signature episode, the way we would be developing it right now, it wouldn't feel anything like that. And I don't want to get in I'd rather work on something and have someone say, The Simpsons did this exact thing, or than stopping myself from trying to break a story the way I might. And I promise you that 90% of the time, if someone would have said at the start, oh, that is too much like another episode, by the time it's done, they wouldn't even think of it. Because it's that different. I had one experience in the writer's room at Family Guy when I was running it. And the hardest thing is to come up with stories that seem original and funny and have and I was just on fire. The story was just falling into place, and 15 people are crowding up, and I can't help but notice that our writer's assistant, who I'd hired on another show and I brought with him, so loyal to me and a good guy, wasn't laughing. And you always note the one person who's not, and the thing is just falling into place, and he's right. And then after maybe 5 or 6 minutes of this thing, and it's like, this thing is done, ready to go out, he says, I think The Simpsons did this episode. I'm like, well, he said, and I think you wrote it. And I was like, oh my God. And let me tell you, in comedy, certainly the job, it's very collaborative. So the episode of The Simpsons that he was referring to, I could not take credit for every story turn, and certainly not every joke. So what I had just done is I had regurgitated 20 really smart Simpsons writers' work on an episode that had aired, 11 years prior, that clearly no one in our room had seen except Dan, who knew the inside out. But it was like, I'd totally forgotten. I was like, oh, well, okay, well, not going to do that. So what else do we got? Maybe they get audited.
Okay, well, this is something I was really excited to talk to you about.
Yeah.
I want you to take me into the writer's room, because I'm curious about how, as writers, we're both writers, very different. And I want to know, and sometimes I collaborate. The majority of my recorded work, I think I wrote by myself, but I've certainly co-written many songs. I came up with the
bridge for Should Have Known Better.
I just think you did. I think you,
That's not true.
I have actually run into people who say, my uncle says he wrote Should Have Known Better with you. Really?
Yeah,
I wrote it by myself. What's your uncle's name? John Garfield. Nope, I've never met him. What? Yeah.
Is that how you stay so hip that your references are to
John Garfield?
Actors who died 100 years ago?
Yeah. Fuck you.
As Lillian Gish once said of the form of music that I practice.
George Raft once said to me,
your son doesn't even know who Lillian Gish is. It's such an old reference.
I barely know who Lillian Gish is, but sadly I do.
It's too old a reference. I overshot.
I want to know what the collaborative process is at Family Guy, for example. First of all, on an average day where you're in the writer's room, how many writers are in the room?
Okay, but do you really think your YouTube viewers want to know that? Or they like to hear about your morning assembly concert where you performed a medley of all your jingles? Because I think they'd be more interested in that. But if you think they want to know about
I stole that from Barry Manilow. Because he had that jingle medley when he was starting out.
It was amazing.
He did jingles.
It was amazing.
I'm stuck on Band-Aids.
Because your dad was and my father wrote about jazz and loved jazz and knew exactly who your dad was and knew who he played for. So he was a musician's musician. And
But that's not how he became famous. He became famous writing jingles.
correct. But when you performed at our school, your backup musicians were just top-notch
Yeah.
players. And just people don't understand that those morning assemblies were usually you'd come in like the third grade would be, singing Smile and opening out snowflake cutouts. And you're just like, when is this going to end? And then the curtain rises and it's like Richard with a microphone and 6 backups.
Yeah.
And it was like a professional concert. You were fantastic.
I was trying to be a
And you sang
rock
other
star.
songs too. And then you did a medley. And I was like,
And then I
good for
started
you.
performing my own songs. Because
I know, and
writing
it was
songs.
great. And we were talking about earlier, we had a long-suffering head of the music department, Vincent Allison, always wore a big bow tie, lovely man, a little formal. And he was just year after year presented with a group of kids who had no musical ability and couldn't sing. And then one falls into his lap, who from the time I knew him at 10, sang like an angel. Even as his voice changed, it just became slightly less soprano. And just flatly refused to perform in any of the school would do yearly operettas. Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. They would do Christmas choir. He wouldn't even join choir. And I just would watch him just try to persuade you to do something. And meanwhile, I'm like, I'll sing it. I didn't want to do it either, actually, because I knew I couldn't sing.
I do remember, but I remember he seemed like a nice man, but he was very resentful because he knew that my family was in this business and that maybe he even thought, well, he's probably on his way to becoming possibly a successful, I was the only sort of successful singer out of that school, I think, maybe. But he knew that maybe there was a possibility. And
again, 45 kids in the class. Let's not.
Yeah, it's not like, yeah.
We're not.
But I think he was.
Madonna was also in our third grade.
I always forget.
Yeah.
She was a great behind me.
Yeah. But the writers' room.
How many?
We have
writers?
a big staff at Family Guy, and we have, counting me and Alec, who runs the show with me, 22. Alex Sulkin, one of the funniest guys around.
Very funny guy.
And that's a much larger staff than a typical show. And the reason for that is if you watch Family Guy, as I know you do, built into the DNA of the show.
I only watch it when I'm on it.
Yeah, and we have. I wish I could take credit.
That's the thing that's so fascinating.
This is the thing that's so amazing. Richard has been on Family Guy now a couple of times, including live action, a hilarious
during the pandemic. But can I tell you something really quick? Hold that thought.
Yes.
Yesterday, we just got back from traveling.
Yeah.
We went to our local grocery store to stock up. And we're in the produce aisle, and this young guy in his 20s, tatted out, is looking at me, and he goes like this. He goes, and I go, hey, and he goes, you. And I went, what? He goes, I saw you on Family Guy.
Yeah, well, that's great. But predating me, and I have been running the show with Alec for 12, 13 years, predating me was Stewie's love for Richard Marx, which was always played as a borderline crush.
Yes.
He loved, and when I saw that was show history, I'm like, guys, I'm about to take this to the next level.
But because we're leaving out a very important part of our story, is that when we both graduated from high school, we lost touch, except for when you came to see me at the Bottom Line.
Correct.
We didn't see each other for decades.
Yes.
Until I got divorced and moved back to LA.
And then we reestablished.
Yeah.
And it was so nice. And then we were able to we did a flashback episode of how Peter and Lois got married in the 90s. And we made Daisy the key. And it was that while she was hosting something on an MTV special, Lois's rich father, who didn't like Peter, put Daisy up to kissing Peter on camera. And we described her as the hottest girl in the 90s.
And he says, Daisy Fuentes. And Daisy's voiceover goes, oh, so that's how you pronounce my name.
Yes, yes. She was quite game. But we have a lot because built into the DNA of the show are these cutaways, which are like sketches on SNL. They might be 10 seconds long, they might be 60 seconds long, but they're these standalone pieces of comedy that are really hard to write. Great sketches, I think, are maybe the toughest form. It's so economical and condensed. So we always have 2 or 3 writers' rooms with 5 or 6 writers, depending on who's out writing a script. 5 or 6 writers working on different things. And one of those rooms every day is working on a cutaway. And they might do 2 a day. And they might do it for a couple of days, then we'll mix it up because you could go crazy if that's all you were doing. So you're rotated into the so-called main room that's working on the script story page by page, or a room breaking a news story. But you always have a third of the staff just doing these extra comic sketches that no other show really does. We still then are also focused on the script. But, you know, the three things I always say to writers that make up your job is, you know, being funny in the room when we're rewriting a script, pitching new things, turning in a draft that's really good, and coming up with an original comic story. And honestly, in my experience, that's in reverse order of importance. If I know a story, I could tell you right now, the next 3 or 4 episodes of Family Guy, and I could tell it to you in 90 seconds. I wouldn't hit every joke. I might not even tell you how it ends, but I know just the moment when you go, that's a funny story, or I'd be curious to see how.
Right.
And as soon as I have that moment in the room where I think I could tell this story to you in 2 minutes, and you would think, oh, I know we're fine. Because with the staff we've got, and they're so funny, we can rewrite anything in a week. And we don't start from scratch because the writers turn in drafts that are good. But you can always make a story funnier. I have had a few experiences when you're at a table read, because we'll break the episode, a writer go off, turn in a first draft, we'll rewrite it, we read it at a table, and then we record it, then the animation starts. But I've been at table reads, and I read the stage directions, so you're kind of pulling the train, where halfway through you just feel like, oh my God, the story makes no sense.
Oh, wow.
And we're losing people. And I don't care how many funny things you have to come, once you've lost their interest and they're thinking, what is this about? You're kind of dead.
You're fucked.
And if you have that story nailed down, and it doesn't have to have the largest stakes in the world, it can be comically small stakes, comically small conflict, but there's got to be something like that. Are you
generally the person who figures that out and
we've
goes,
got
it's
collaborative, but I think that's one of my jobs, whether I rise to the occasion or not. But I think, yeah, if I'm given an outline and a first draft, et cetera, before we send it out, we'll meet with the writers and say, Alec and I will, here's where we think it goes off rails, here what we want to fix, here are some new ways to go. But it's such a collaborative process. We don't send any story out until a room has really worked on it, presented it to me and Alec, we go back in it with it.
How much of the funniest shit
is in the first draft?
Happens in the room as opposed to somebody at home. You think you're in the shower and you go, oh my God, I just came up with this great line. How much of it actually happens in the room as opposed to out?
It's certainly a good amount in each. But I will tell you that every day, several times a day, there is something said, something pitched that gets us to laugh out loud. And not every day, but every once in a while, there's something that's so funny, you just think, oh, this is going to be memorable. This will be so. And then the writers, sure, in their drafts, and sometimes it's just a line, sometimes it's a big swing. Like one of our writers, Patrick Megan, turned in a draft where he did a commercial parody for Citibank. I think it was Citibank, but it was one of those where, you know, it's a mom and pop florist company, and it's just how Citibank is helping. But he did it not once, not twice, but building the whole fact that the bank is basically taking advantage of everyone, but it was done in the format of those Tina Fey, you know, commercials. And that's not something that would have been easy to pitch out in a room, to have a joke, but the sustained swing of coming back to it for 30, 40 seconds, 3 different times, with it escalating and the bankruptcies or whatever, or the criticisms of Citibank that came out, and really, while it was a parody of the commercial, maybe somebody could say, oh, we should parody those commercials, but to actually take the time, or a scene that builds between Stewie and Brian with passive aggressive hostility, you know, which are some of the funniest. That, I think, you know, there are many things on the show that I think benefit from one writer sitting alone and working on how the scene is balanced. But like
so for instance, one of the most memorable moments for me, years ago, And it's been so long that I might slightly mess up the initial premise, but Stewie and Brian are in a truck, I think, and they're going on the highway. And Stewie either hits something or does something innocent enough that the truck veers and it causes this like complete chain reaction car accident where it's like it's like a Michael Bay movie happening in animation, where it's just crash after crash and this chain reaction and they're launched from the vehicles and everything, and they end up, I think it's in the snow even, and finally and it's just chaos. And Brian sees Stewie, and Stewie's just sort of sitting there like this, and finally the words are finally uttered. Brian says, "Oh my God, Stewie, are you okay?" Stewie goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "What happened?" And Stewie goes, just some stupid stuff went down.
Yeah, and it's those moments, if you don't have something that's going to make...
But my question is, let's take that because it's so memorable for me. Maybe you don't remember, obviously, the details, but like, would you guess that somebody came up with the idea of a car thing, like a visual thing, and then we need a line to like nail it? Or did somebody say, what if something like crazy happened and Stewie's reaction was, just some stupid stuff with that?
I have a feeling typically what might happen is that there'll be either the writer or in the room, we're going to say, then the truck should just collapse. And then my guess is it probably had a line in there to button that moment. And I have a feeling once that script was then in the writer's room, people thought, all right, how do we make that even funnier? Because sometimes, and this is certainly true of scripts I've written too, not every page has the one that you think is the closer. And so you'll go and you think, no, it's funny. And certainly that's the right area. Right. And then we might sit on it in the room for 10 minutes or for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Because once you've, thought, well, this could be made better. And people have you have a sense of the kind of line it should be. So then in that moment when someone pitches, we all adopt Seth's character's voices poorly, but someone will say it as Stewie, and I'm sure that got the biggest laugh. And that would be my bet.
That ties together with what I think is the comparison, which is I relate to that so much because there have been times when I've been working on a song, either alone or with somebody, and I come up with that melody for the end of the chorus, and I think, wow, that's really, really good. And then I go, but is it? And it's sometimes really like, one of the first people I ever worked with was Kenny Rogers. So Lionel Richie introduced me to Kenny Rogers, and I ended up singing background vocals for Kenny Rogers. And then I overheard a conversation. I was going back the next day to do some more background vocals, and I overheard Kenny mention that they needed another song for the album. And I went home that night to my shitty little apartment in the Valley, and I wrote a song called Crazy. And I brought it in the next day. I didn't bring it in. I couldn't record it. I just went up to him and I said, I've written a song.
Good for you. I didn't know this story.
And it's a good way to get fired, by the way.
And what happened?
He, instead of kicking me out of the studio, he said, well, he was a little exasperated. Like, the background singer is not supposed to come up and go, hey, I'm a songwriter too.
Right.
I was 19.
Yeah.
He said, well, let me hear it. And so I played him what I had written. He made one little change. He put his name on it. He was then the co-writer, which was the game that those people played. Yeah. But we joked about it literally to his dying day.
He put it on the album.
#1 country single.
Unbelievable.
And then he recorded other songs of mine. So it was the beginning of my songwriting
So
career.
you really put in your time between March
yes, I did.
of 1982 and
that was
April
a tough 4 months,
of
man.
1982. And then from then on, it's been gravy.
It was a tough few months.
Yeah.
My point is, in working with him, when we were in the studio recording the song, there was something that he was like, a line of lyric that he was like, I don't know. I think that could be better. And I became very protective of it and I was insecure.
Right.
And so I was going, what's wrong with it? He said, well, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I think just that line could be better. And I said, I don't know. I think it's really good. And he looked at me and he said something that I've never forgotten. He looked me dead in the eye. And he said, Richard, sometimes you have to give up good to get great.
Well,
And I went,
I had a moment like that with Seth. Seth for years, he had a recording booth built on our floor in the office where he would record. And
he still writes a lot, right?
no, as Seth would be the first to say, starting a decade ago, he changed his role at the show. He still, of course, reads everything because he's 60% of the voices.
Right.
So he records everything. And he's like quality control. When he's reading it, there might be something. But by his own admission and desire, so he could do other shows and movies, he stepped back. But while now he's a recording booth at his house and he doesn't have to come in the office. But back in the day, he was standing in the booth and I was on the other side with our two engineers, and he's a music stand, and he was reading something. I could tell and as he read it, Chris and Patrick, our guys in there, thought it was funny, but I could see Seth and he just said, I don't get, and he was kind of picking it apart, and I was just thinking, oh, I like that so much, and I don't want to, it's late, I don't want to have to go back and rewrite something if I'm honest. And I clicked on, I said, Seth, Chris was chuckling throughout. There's a long pause, and it has that deep voice. He said, that's right, Rich, and chuckles are what we're after. And that, for me, was your... And I was like, we'll replace it.
Yeah.
And I had said chuckles, and it was chuckles. It wasn't. Yeah. There were no huge laughs.
It wasn't. It wasn't even a guffaw.
So he's always been a great. He sets the bar, and he sets it really high. And Seth, I had the fun and luck of overlapping with him a little bit. My first go round, before I was in Family Guy just as a consultant for those 6 or 7 months, and he was still in the room. And then we went on and did the Cleveland show. I mean, there's no better Family Guy writer than Seth. And it's not just because he pitches the jokes or the ideas in the voices of all the characters.
Right.
So when he throws something out, well, he's going to make it better.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't have that idea today, well, he wants us to. And, that's why the show is still on the air after 25 years.
It's amazing.
But yeah, we're not going for chuckles.
Can we talk about any of the big celebrities you've pissed off? Or can you even talk about any of it?
You mean, because of jokes on the show?
Like poking fun?
I feel like, look, the show, I think, and by Seth's own, I think, preference, probably does less of those, of celebrity takedowns or jokes than it might have done in some of the earlier years, just because at some point the show keeps, but there's still a few. And it's easier for me to talk about the ones that predated me than a couple that, there was one.
Has anybody ever confronted you personally and said, that was fucked up?
No. No one has confronted me personally, but that's because in a couple of instances I've avoided them. I was at, I don't want to say, but I'm just going to say I was at my daughter's freshman parents something, and there was a dinner for families that had given or contributed to this whatever scholarship fund. And I was at the table with Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones, whose child was in my daughter's class. They could not have been more charming and down to earth. And all I'm thinking is, I'm not going to go into it because Family Guy has taken a healthy swing at Michael Douglas. Not being just a healthy swing.
And then he's not making the connection that you...
No, because I'm not... But then, after dinner, we're just standing around, and he's going around, being so avuncular and nice. Everyone, so, Richard, what do you do? Oh, you're a singer, Tom. Do I know some of your songs? And I'm counting down, and I'm like 2 people away. And I just literally disappear. I turn, I go to the bar.
You ran for your life.
I just ran for my life, because I was like...
Yeah.
Because I would have... He was so nice.
You want to leave that memory.
And I know that there was a good chance when I said it, because it became viral. I think someone in his orbit probably saw it. And I then had another experience with, and I don't even want to say this guy's name, an actor who had been a movie star that was on a very popular TV show. And it still makes me laugh, and I may have to tell you just because.
You'll tell me after.
And then I went to a friend's birthday celebration, like her 50th birthday in Mexico. And he was friends with her whole family. And we're coming back, And I had avoided him the entire weekend because I'd also heard, because one of his kids knows my daughter, they thought I was hilarious and he did not. So I've already been told. So I avoid him. Who sits down in the chair next to me but this guy? And I'm just like...
He's a big star.
Yes. Fortunately, he's also kind of a bit of a dick because he doesn't even say hello or introduce himself. And I'm thinking, thank God, I'm in the clear. Now I'm thinking, you know what would be even better is if I put in my AirPods so then he can see that I'm... So I reach into my bag and this was right after... This was in January. So for Christmas, we had gotten the crew, my idea, AirPods with the Family Guy logo on them. So I'm pulling out these AirPods like this, and I see them, and I just panic, and I throw them. Because I thought he's going to look down and see Family Guy. So I just throw them. And people are like, what just hit me in the eye? The stewardess is coming down, and she's like, I said, I'll just take it, thank you. And I'm just like sitting on it, just going, oh, I don't need him to know. And I just sat there, and I remember he had a copy of Town and Country magazine, which he read from cover to cover. And I was like, I've never seen anyone read Town and Country magazine in my life.
No.
Much less every article. And I was like, the 2-hour flight went fine. I kind of slipped out, but I haven't. But there is a famous story of, I think it's been told in public, and it'll be told here, where Family Guy had taken a crack at William Shatner, who is one of Seth's idols, and they've become good friends, and Seth had him help him with the Oscars, and Seth just loves the guy. And there had been this joke, and the next thing, this story, as I've heard...
Do you remember what the joke was?
I'm not going to repeat it, but I do.
Okay, you'll tell me later.
Yes. One would understand why a man might find this joke problematic. But the word came to the room that William Shatner was on the phone, and he was not happy. This is after the Sunday it aired. And Seth asked one of the sweetest writers on staff, Salt of the Earth guy, Danny Smith, I hope he's told this story, to take the call. And Danny is just a lovely guy, hilarious guy. And he gets on the phone, and as he then reports it, when William Shatner was complaining about it, Danny's response was, I know, I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. And I'm going to tell you something. When I saw this, I was shocked. You know, some of the younger writers on the staff think it's kind of cute to slip something in. And
Danny is his name?
Yeah.
I want to hang out with Danny.
He's spectacular. Look, I hope he's told the story. But, I mean, let's ignore the fact that it takes a year to produce these shows, and every line has to be written and recorded and drawn and then colored and then spotted with music and then sound. I mean, it was just like, but whatever it was, Danny, because he's such an authentic fellow, he and Shatner bonded.
I love it.
And it's now whenever we think that someone might,
Did you get any blowback from Tom Cruise?
Not that I've ever heard.
Really?
Yeah. No. I think Tom Cruise is too big a star to...
Yeah.
You mean the fact that we have a character on our show called Tiny Tom Cruise? Yeah. And he meets Stewie in the little boys section fighting over a pair of pants?
Yes.
Yeah, that might have been an issue. And here's the thing, Seth, first of all, who, 25 years ago was writing and defending and pushing really envelope-pushing comedy and really funny stuff, and was proven right because the show has been such a success. There are times, he had said, I don't think I'm embarrassing Seth, that he, when he's met Tom Cruise at different moments and said, as I've heard from other people who know him, that he's a lovely guy.
Yeah.
I've heard that from someone who's worked with him a lot. And Seth was like, oh. But he truly is not micromanaging the show. He's not writing the show. And he doesn't tell us what we can or can't do. But I know, probably in that instance, because he had encountered him socially and had the sense he was a lovely person.
But let's face it, at the end of the day...
But the biggest movie star in the world, and it's not like we're...
No, but let's face it, if you don't have a sense of humor about yourself, especially if you're on a level of fame like that, then that's your problem.
Yeah.
A comedy show, especially an animated comedy show, shouldn't have to worry about, is this going to piss off?
And there's so many people who then own it, including Seth. When South Park is taking shots, Seth's reaction is, what's good for the goose.
Yeah.
It's like, it means you're in the conversation if they want. And it's like fair game.
I
People
remember
can say what they want.
I think the first reference of me, because I had to approve the license for the song.
Yeah.
And this was before you. I think it had to be before you.
Yeah, it was.
Meg was going to her high school prom.
Uh-huh.
And she couldn't get a date, so Brian went with her. And they licensed Hold On to the Nights, which was my big number one song for me, but it's become this prom anthem. To this day, I have young people who say, oh yeah, your song Hold On to the Nights was our prom song. This is like 37 years later. But I watched it because I had licensed it and I loved the show. And it was a little bit of a dig in that Meg pulls Brian up on the dance floor. She goes, oh my God, this song rocks. And it's my song, Hold On. And Brian turns and he's got a flask and he just starts drinking. Like, holy shit, kill me. Now I could have gone, well, that's kind of a dig on my, but it was hilarious.
I know. And also there, I will say he's drinking because he's at a high school prom with Meg, who's not the most popular girl. Not because the music is terrible. But also that is the way to own it. I'm telling you, it's like in our office, big, vast office, pre-COVID, hundreds of animators around. And I was in the kitchen once, and then one of the artists, I did not know who she was, because there's so many, I didn't. And she said to me, can I ask you a personal question? And I said, sure. And she said, has anyone ever told you you look like a really short Jeff Goldblum? And I was like, lady, Jeff Goldblum, his lanky, tall frame, that's half of what, but and then later, and she could see, later her supervisor came to me and said, oh, she's mortified. I said, I have told that story a dozen times already today. I will be telling it for the,
of course,
because it's funny.
It is.
And yes, I'm short. And she thought it was some fashion as like a compliment, but that's self-deprecation. If you can't laugh about yourself, I always say to comedy writers, or if you're going to start with truly self-deprecating stuff. Like for me, it's not enough that I said, oh, I'm on the short side, right? Because big deal.
Right.
It would have to be something a little closer to the bone where the audience is like, oh, he's right. Because it gives you license to then kind of bring the same mirror up to other people because they're laughing with you and at you. And
the more sensitive you are to stuff like that, the more a target you're going to be, actually, I think.
Yeah.
So how much longer do you think the show will go?
You know, I think a few years ago, I wouldn't have known how to answer that because you think it's been on for 20 plus years. Given all the stuff we've done for the 25th and given all the conversations I've had with Seth and listen, I think the show is going to keep going for a while longer.
That's great.
Seth is now saying, he says, it's still really funny.
Yeah.
And he says, people come up to me just as often, if not more. And he said, that's the litmus test. I mean.
And you still really love working there,
we
right?
have, you know, the rich get richer in many things. And the more you know the people you work with in comedy, the more free you are with them. Mm-hmm. I think the looser you are, because that's where the line between something that's really funny and really stupid, or really funny and edgy or offensive, is paper thin. And if you edit yourself, you don't get there. We have writers who've worked together for 15 or 20 years. We keep it fresh. There's new writers. So it is an enviable group of writers who make me laugh, where, again, an animated show like The Simpsons and Family Guy, what people don't, I think, always immediately recognize is one of the reasons I think they're both really good shows is we have 40 or 50 characters, you know.
Yeah.
Because Seth voices 11 of them.
Yeah.
Alex Borstein does. Live action show can't afford that cast of regulars. You watch a half-hour comedy, you watch Veep, you watch Modern Family, they've got their 8 regulars and a couple of guest stars per week. We could have 50 speaking parts in an episode, and stories are easier to come up with and more rich when you have such a variety of, and then once you've established the people in the town, I could name 3 to 6 tertiary characters on Family Guy, you know, and you would say, oh yeah, I'd be interested to see a story with that. I mean, it's just a rich, rich canvas.
One of my favorite afternoons, you were kind enough to invite me to a table read. And you said, you know, not a lot of people get to do this. And Seth was remote somewhere, but I remember he was on a video, and Alex was there, and I got to watch you guys do a table read of an episode. And it was great fun, and it was funny, but it was being there in that room where I first truly marveled at what Seth does.
Oh.
I mean, shifting gears from character to character, line at a like this line is this character, and the next line is this, and he's switching without any kind of like.
And that's how he records it.
That's unbelievable.
People always assume he does all of Stewie through the script, then goes back. No, as the scene is going, and I'm telling you, and it's not because he's, he is a perfectionist.
Yeah.
He might do it one take. He might do 15 of a line, and because he's hearing it. And the few times, Alec and I alternate covering his records to direct him. The few times where I'm going to push the button to say, oh, actually, that was supposed to be said ironically because what's coming. Before I can hit the button, he'll go back 2 lines and re-record because he's now heard it replay in his ear.
Yeah.
Then he gets to the next line. He says, oh, then this had to be more of a question. And he'll self-correct. And he does that through all of these characters. And it's, Brian, Stewie, Peter, Quagmire, Dr. They're major characters who are just Carter Pewterschmidt, Tom Tucker, whatever we put in front of him. Yeah. Then suddenly it'll be Stewie and Brian are singing. He'll do one first, then he'll harmonize the next on to the next. No, it's and here's the thing. Alex Borstein is the same when she's in the booth, and all of our cast, they're, they know what they're doing. And and we just had the 25th anniversary at the Dolby Theater as a part of Paley Fest, and big crowd for those guys. And we did a table read, and they had, the screen projected, and beforehand they were asking, do we want to have stills of the show? Do you want to have clips? I said, no, what they want to see are put the cameras, of course, on the cast, because they want to watch Alex and Seth and Mila and Seth Green and change. How does Seth's face look when he's doing Stewie? Just to see it coming out of a grown man.
Yeah.
Of course, and they would cheer. Patrick Warburton opens his mouth as Joe, the audience cheers.
Yeah.
It's such a phenomenon that I am really lucky to be a part of it. And my line always is, I joined Family Guy as soon as I could see it was a certified hit. That's when I attached my my cart to the gravy train. It just happens that's when I came. But, the show in seasons 1 through 12 or whatever it was before I got there, wasn't shaky exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's when I became a fan from the get-go.
But so it's a treat to see the interaction with the fans. When we'd go to Comic-Con, we haven't done it in a few years because of COVID, but we'll go again this summer. And I had once seen Seth and crew before I joined the show do a Family Guy live performance at Carnegie Hall. And I went, sold out. I'm telling you, Richard, I've never seen a concert, with the exception of You at the Bottom Line, where the performers have the audience in the palm of their hand from minute one. Wow. 3 hours. And I was just looking around going, this show is not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's now 13 years after that. And this was the first one of these live things they've done since then. But it's a delightful team.
I love that. Well, you've come a long way from the soccer field.
And writing our jokes on the window of the yearbook where we worked and putting little comedy pieces in the window. Remember that? You have to remember that.
No, I remember you. I was the photo editor of the yearbook.
I know, but we used to put jokes. Well, we then also put some jokes in the yearbook.
I think it was you and Phil.
Oh, maybe Phil.
More.
You're not Phil Brooks?
This whole thing is so embarrassing
I was
now.
in here when did Phil Brooks become a singer? Oh, Richard Marx, I never liked you.
Oh, you were that guy. I'm very happy for you. And I'm so happy that we're pals.
I am as well.
I'm a big fan of your talent, but I just love that we are in each other's lives.
Me too. Absolutely.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Oh.
We forgot to turn it on.
I think we got a level though.